Well, good afternoon. Thanks to all of you here from the Pittsburgh community who took the time out to discuss this important topic today. I thank Congressman Doyle and his staff and the Pittsburgh City Council for welcoming and hosting us. I'd like to thank my colleagues, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee and Congressman Payne, for their participation in today's difficult conversation. I wish we were here on a less somber occasion, however. This is a necessary one. The Committee on Homeland Security, which I chair, has grappled with domestic terrorism, primarily on the international front. Pittsburgh has had the unfortunate experience of dealing with domestic terrorism on the homeland. FBI statistics and other statistics tell us as members of Congress that these acts are on the rise, disproportionately than international acts. So we're going to have to, as members of Congress, and we share some of the jurisdiction for domestic terrorism, but our hope is to talk to you in a very frank manner today about what's going on in Washington, what you think we should do. Tell us personal experience about the tragedy that Pittsburgh had thrust upon it. And so from that, the long-term goal is craft legislation, if need be, to address it so that other communities won't be so unfortunate in that experience. As we talked about this, the unfortunate thing, we saw what happened in Odessa, Texas recently, Dayton, El Paso, and we go on and on. And so, as a sidebar, I compliment Walmart and Kroger for taking a proactive stance on limiting access to certain guns in their in Walmart's properties, but also saying that they really would prefer that people not wear their guns in their stores. If you come in shopping for groceries, I would not think that a sidearm would be necessary. So we'll talk about the corporate responsibility that we have in this country, as well as religious responsibility and civic and other engagement. What I'd like to do is turn it over to our host, Congressman Doyle, to give us some comments. But I'd like to, at the outset, indicate that you have no better representative than the person to my left. And that's not a paid political advertisement. That is just the truth. He works hard on behalf of this community, and I respect him for it. So, Congressman Doyle.
Chairman Thompson, thank you very much, and to my colleagues Sheila Jackson-Lee and Don Payne. We welcome you to Pittsburgh. We wish we weren't having you to Pittsburgh on this topic, but I want to thank you and your staff for putting this together and for bringing the Committee on Homeland Security to our town. I think we have a unique story to tell here, and it's an honor to have you here. I want to thank all the panelists that are here too, who are taking time out of their schedules to share their experiences with the committee. As many of us here realize, we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the shooting in Squirrel Hill. But you know, it doesn't feel like it around here. Every day, families and friends of the 7 victims still struggle. Congregations are still praying, and the neighborhood in Squirrel Hill and the Pittsburgh community as a whole is still just trying to get our heads around this senseless violence that struck our lives last October, and as incident after incident has taken place since then. in the rest of our country, and just grappling with what we need to do to contain this. So no one in this room needs reminding that gun violence is epidemic in our country. We're watching this everywhere, and as I was saying earlier, I think to you, Mr. Chairman, that when the tragedy at Sandy Hook took place and those children were slaughtered, I just couldn't, as a parent, as horrific as it was, I said, this is it. If there is any silver lining to this horrible event, it's that we will finally, come to grips with this and do something. And sadly, that wasn't the case. Once again, there seems to be an opportunity and an appetite, and I think the public is starting to speak out loudly, regardless of what your political affiliation is. This goes across all political affiliations. And I think members of Congress who, for whatever reasons, are reluctant to consider legislation are now starting to change their tunes, and I'm hopeful that when we come back to Washington next week, that we can continue to keep that pressure on. As you know, we've had 2 bills that we passed in the House of Representatives on background checks in February, I believe, that have been sitting in the Senate, and I think it's incumbent that we deal with that. But I think most importantly, Mr. Chairman, I want you to hear from our people here in Pittsburgh. We have obviously Rabbi Myers, who has lived this up close and personal and firsthand, and then members of our community. We have the head of the Jewish Federation of Pittsburgh, Jeff is here, and our county executive and our mayor, and people from law enforcement. And I think they all have important stories to tell, and I think they can give you some insights after almost a year of reflection. Some of the things they'd like to see us in Washington, D.C. Consider. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back my time and thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Congressman Doyle. I'll now have opening comments from our 2 other members who are here. First one will be Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas.
Chairman, thank you so very much, and thank you for convening this field hearing, which is so vital to be able to hear from the people who have been directly involved. It is important to note that the chairman, myself, and Congressman Payne sit on the Homeland Security Committee, and we are delighted that Congressman Doyle, who stood up so strongly, so compassionately, so rightly during the Tree of Life heinous act of terror, that he has allowed us to come to listen to his constituents. We are classmates coming into Congress at the same time, and I have enjoyed his leadership in the United States Congress. I do think it is important to take note of the fact that this committee, through the chairman and ranking member and those of us who served respectively as chairs and ranking members, we focused on domestic terrorism at least 7 years ago, somewhere under 10 years. We were receptive to a report that was produced by a DHS employee a few years back about domestic terrorism. Unfortunately, he was condemned for his report. And we ultimately saw, to our dismay, in a recent year, the defunding of a very important section of the Department of Homeland Security, and that is, of course, the focus on domestic terrorism. Homeland Security is overlapping jurisdiction or parallel jurisdiction with the Judiciary Committee, and we believe this is crucial. We had Director Wray of the FBI in front of the Homeland Security Committee, who reiterated the fact that domestic terrorism is on the rise, and it is a severe problem. I think what I want to say, first of all, is how pained our hearts were in seeing the members of the synagogue and the community impacted the Tree of Life. In my community, synagogues welcomed us to worship with them, of which we did. But in concluding, I think we have to realize that there is an epidemic of gun violence that has to be addressed, but also the driving force, unfortunately, has become this degree of hatred, white nationalism, white supremacy. In the instance of the Tree of Life, we understand that the passion and compassion of the Tree of Life to deal with the needs of immigrants and others was seen as a negative to this country. And I think we cannot answer these questions if we don't confront those kinds of sentiments and those individuals that hold it. And I hope as we listen to you, you will give us even more to be able to cure this, what seems to be an epidemic. And in this great state, that was one of our early seats or early places of the promotion of democracy, that we will learn and we will take this back to Washington and be able to be constructive, as Congressman Doyle and Chairman Thompson said. I've come here to do that, and I thank you all for your presence.
Thank you, Congressman Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving us the opportunity to come here and hear from citizens that have lived this horrific event almost a year ago. I hail from Newark, New Jersey, and we have been on the committee very concerned about these issues around domestic terrorism. It goes back for me as far as Timothy McVeigh and the Oklahoma bombing. But it's just been a difficult road to haul getting the American people and leaders in Congress to acknowledge the issue of domestic terrorism. We are gung-ho and ready to fight the foreign fighter, and we've done a good job of keeping the homeland safe. But it's time to look inward and understand that we have a problem here in the homeland from domestic terrorism. I want to echo the sentiments of your member of Congress, Mike Doyle, who is a great leader in the Congress, it was stated. And we all love him on a lighter note, because he's the manager of the Democratic baseball team. And we've won 8 or 9 years, as long as I've been there. But just on that one light note, I am on the subcommittee for emergency response, recovery, and communications. And that committee deals with any man-made or natural disaster that happens in the country. So whether it's Hurricane Dorian right now, or what you faced last year, it comes through my committee. So that day of your situation, I watched in horror at the Tree of Life. And these circumstances, these issues, these situations impact me deeply. So we're here to listen and to learn from you, and hopefully can go back and try to formulate legislation and policy that can help try to stem this tide that we see in the nation. And with that, sir, I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. Let me again welcome our witnesses who are here. The format will be more or less open introductions. We have some suggested topics after you kind of tell us who you are, and that apart from that, we want it to be free-flowing. I was told that no one in this group would be accused of being quiet. And so for that reason, as no other reason, you were selected too. But as important is your respective positions put you in a unique role to help us as legislators craft some solutions. So Mayor, if we can start with you, kind of open remarks. We don't put a time on it, but
I'll be brief.
but we'll go around, and then we have some structured questions, and then some Q&A back and forth as we go forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Bill Peduto. I'm the mayor of the city of Pittsburgh. Each time, and I'm on a committee now with other mayors around this country that none of us would ever choose to be on. Each time that a incident occurs within this country, the mayors from the cities where mass homicides have occurred either give a phone call, send a text message, send an email to the mayor of the next city, giving some advice, giving some encouragement, letting them know that they're not alone. And each time that you do that, it brings back the incident that occurred in your own city. I think there's a couple things that we need to talk about today. Number one is this is an epidemic. If it were occurring with any other item other than a gun, there would be not only hearings like this, but actions taken. If we saw mass homicides occurring in cities because of toasters, we would have those toasters taken off the shelves. We would have those toasters regulated to the point where there wouldn't be. I mean, we saw it happen with automobiles in the 1960s. We took actions and created safety belts and other safety items and airbags and lessened the amount of carnage. And that's what we need to be able to do under this epidemic. We need to be able to lessen the amount of carnage. We recognize that there are weapons on our streets that outgun our own police, that are created by a manufacturer in order to be able to get the most bodies off a battlefield the most effective way possible. I and our police chief now have our officers carrying tourniquets because the doctors in our emergency rooms tell us we can't sew them back together. In Philadelphia, the mayor has ordered his police to pick the bodies up off the ground and not wait for the ambulance because people are dying in our streets because of these types of weapons that are being used. And even just yesterday, a young man in a neighboring county put out a threat that he was going to cause harm at one of our hospitals. Our officers were able to trace him down, found out at 3:30 in the morning that he didn't have weapons. But what if he did? His own family members couldn't take that weapon away from him, nor could our police officers. He may have threatened to hurt himself, and yet we have these special rules in place that would prohibit the safety of the public at large over what basically is not an amendment to the Constitution, but a selling of the Constitution to an industry.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And we'll get into the discussion, but your comments were crystal clear in what you say, and you are absolutely right. The reluctance on a Congress not being forthright in addressing what we are faced with in this situation should not be. Tough decisions doesn't mean you don't make the decision. That means you do it. It's just a tough decision. I thank you for that. Our next witness is our county executive, Rich Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee, for being here. We appreciate you coming to Pittsburgh. You also, thank you for reminding us, but we know Congressman Doyle's a great congressman. We're lucky to have him. We know what a great job that he does. I've been the county executive for 8 years, And during that time, there's an awful lot of things that happen very, very well, and there's an awful lot of setbacks in the jobs that I serve in. But no day can compare to the day, that Saturday morning in October of a year ago, and the tragedy that occurred. In a peaceful neighborhood, in a neighborhood that is welcoming to people of all faiths, of all ethnicities, in a place of worship that is a place of love, a place where people go to celebrate, to pray. And that day just shattered that peaceful neighborhood, that peaceful place that Rabbi Myers will be hearing from in a little bit. As the mayor said, it makes no sense that this one product that is designed to do one thing, to kill as many people as quickly and efficiently as it can, is allowed to be out on our streets and allowed to be purchased. And allowed to be purchased by people who haven't had a check on their background and the things that they have done. And it's allowed to be purchased by people who put up red flags that are everywhere about maybe some of the things that they've been spewing or things that they have gone through. We're never going to eliminate hate. That's not going to happen. But we can eliminate or try to eliminate some of the equipment and weaponry and have some background checks that can limit some of the things that are happening. We're the only country that these things continue to happen. And while Pittsburgh is just one city, it, as the mayor said, he's part of a committee and part of a club that no mayor wants to be part of. Whether it's El Paso, whether it's Dayton, whether it's all the cities that we talk about. We hope that something can be done at the federal level. We hope something can be done, quite frankly, at the state level, but we appreciate you being here to hear our story and to listen to the story of what happened to not just those 11 people, but what continues to happen on our streets, in our city, and throughout our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't think there's any disagreement with your comments. Chief Schubert, is that Sunbert? Is that
Schubert.
Schubert, okay. We'd like to hear from you at this point.
Okay, well, one, I just want to welcome to the city of Pittsburgh.
Thank you.
We have a beautiful city. If you'd have asked, just over a year ago, if something like the Tree of Life could happen in Pittsburgh, I would have said no. Although we train and prepare for things like this, I would just never think that it would happen in Pittsburgh. And if it can happen in Pittsburgh, it can happen anywhere. And we continue to see acts of violence throughout the country, which is, it's heartbreaking to see it pop up on social media or the news, all these different acts that are occurring throughout the country. Now, I'm not a politician. I don't want to be a politician. I'm a cop. Protecting people is what we do. We go out each and every day trying to make a difference, putting our lives on the line to help people we don't know. And I'll be forever grateful for what our officers do. And I'll be forever grateful for what they did at the Tree of Life. The response that they had, Pittsburgh police, county police, sheriffs, outside Pittsburgh law enforcement agencies, the federal government, those agencies, everybody came to help. And it's an incident that will always be on our minds. We'll never forget the victims. We'll never forget right now, as we sit here, we have 3 officers who still haven't returned to work. Tim Mattson, Tony Burke, and Dan Mead. It's almost a year, and they still haven't returned to work because of their injuries from that day. I don't speak on, political or just our constitutional rights for the Second Amendment, but what I will tell you is in nearly 28 years as being a Pittsburgh police officer and Coriopolis Police Department a year before I came here. The level of violence and the trauma of the injuries that I've seen from long guns over the years it's sickening to see people that have to go through that, and we have to deal with it, and we have to work with the families and try to bring justice to the families, to the victims of things like that occur. But something needs done to help fix the problem, because there's a problem, or I don't think we'd be sitting here, and I don't think we'd be watching almost nightly, it seems, of another incident that occurred. Somebody that has a long weapon with a 100-round clip makes no sense. So we're here to provide with whatever information we can on our end.
Thank you, Chief. And I think the members here in agreement on the weapons, the high capacity magazines and some other things like that. And I think, and we'll talk a little bit about it later, but on the House side, I think a lot of those things we'll talk about today, we either have already done them or will do them shortly. But we are a bicameral body, and we need some help out of the Senate to really get it done. So thank you very much. Chief McDonough, you can kind of help us with this.
Thank you, sir.
comment too.
I'm not a politician either, much like Chief Schubert, but I have been a cop for a number of years. I have the good fortune. I served as a state trooper. I served as a municipal police chief. I worked briefly for the U.S. Attorney's Office, and now I'm fortunate to be the county police superintendent. So I've seen policing at the federal level, the county level, the state level, and the municipal level. What all those levels of policing share is violence and gun violence. It cuts across policed urban areas, policed suburban areas, and rural areas. It's part of our culture. Violence is a part of American culture. No one can deny that. So I think if we talk about solving the problem of violence, we're not going to do that. But I think that we can reduce the problem of violence and gun violence through some common sense restrictions. We can't eliminate something, we can at least cut our losses, if you will. And we can do that with some, Chief Schubert brought up a very good example, 100-round drum magazines. I don't see a use for those in the hands of citizens, but that's a glaring example. So the only thing I'm going to say about Tree of Life is it's a day that, as several of the speakers have said, it's going to live in our memories forever, but it may be a little bit, hate to offend anyone, but I took a lot of positives away from that as well. The way the community came together, and specifically on the law enforcement side, the examples of the first responders from the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, we'll never forget those guys. So,
Well, and that's one of the other reasons we're here. We've taken note of how the community responded once this incident occurred, and if there's some takeaways from it that other communities who've had that same experience can have, even though it's an unfortunate experience, there's still some lessons learned from that, however tragic they are. So let me ask Rabbi Myers to take as much time as you care to take to talk about the tragedy.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson, members of Congress. Thank you for the privilege of testifying before you today. Welcome to the beautiful city of Pittsburgh. Representative Payne, we share a lot in common. I was born in Beth Israel, lived across the street from Wequahic Park.
Yes.
So
Same hospital I was born in.
we're fellows in many ways. I'm a victim, a witness, and survivor of the worst attack in a synagogue in the history of the United States. And the Jewish community has been on these shores since 1654. Since that fateful day of October 27, 2018, I, the congregants of Tree of Life, along with the other two congregations that share our building, New Light and Dor Chadash, and the city of Pittsburgh, have been overwhelmed by expressions of love from across the planet. People of all faiths, colors, and sexual orientation have enveloped us in a vast global hug that continues unabated. Their message is very clear. The acts of one person are not representative of all of humanity. But alas, the acts of brutality and cruelty can overwhelm us. And when coupled with incessant anti-Semitic words and dastardly deeds across the United States and around the world, we are reminded almost daily that a pernicious, ancient evil flourishes. What most Americans don't know or appreciate is the warmth and togetherness that is Pittsburgh. I can state this objectively, as I too am an immigrant to Pittsburgh, having spent most of my life in the New York and New Jersey area. I live in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, and the love and care from people of all walks of life in my city post-October 27 were typical prior to that date, only more intense afterwards. Religious leaders of all faiths have reached out to me, affording me a unique opportunity to get to know them and their communities, where we can work together to better our community. The metaphor of America as a melting pot is a beautiful image, but sadly, it is not true. We do not know our neighbors. We live in silos with no bridges connecting them. Many choose to live in their own private silos, not wanting others to enter their silo. Some people just don't know how to build a bridge. All you have to do is tour Pittsburgh. We have 446 bridges. This is where religious leaders like me can make a difference. I'm a bridge builder. When the Muslim community extended an olive branch to me, I responded by offering an olive tree. The same goes for the Roman Catholic, various Protestant denominations, the Sikh, Buddhist, Jain, Baptist, AME, and so on. We have so much more in common that we must work together. The modest baby steps that we are taking will mature into adult steps, hopefully yielding bushels of olives. Opportunities to partner with the local government and the police department continue to grow as well. We can be the nation's laboratory to model actions that may work throughout the country, without me minimizing the efforts of those already working to achieve these same goals. We, as clergy and congregants, are striving to find ways beyond visiting each other's worship services, to really getting to know our neighbors, to consider their needs, and to determine how we can work together to realize positive outcomes. Please know that this was happening in Pittsburgh prior to October 27th. But this date and the atrocity that it brought created a new sense of urgency. We must see to it that all children in all schools throughout this country learn about their neighbors and strive to understand them in an effort to appreciate their faith, not merely tolerate them. We must provide the tools for all people to honor and respect their neighbors. And right now, we as a nation are not being successful in doing this. Just 2 weeks after October 27th, the city of Pittsburgh held a rally at Point State Park, and I was asked to speak. It was here that I made a pledge not to use the word hate, which I will say here only once for demonstration purposes. The H word, as I call it, is a 4-letter word, and obscenity that deserves to be in our mental wastebaskets. If you truly must say that you H something, just say you don't like it. H speech is a severe choice of words that usually will lead to violent actions, as was the case in the Tree of Life shootings. When you don't understand your neighbor, it can lead to mistrust, fear, loathing, and H speech, which ultimately leads you to unconscionable and deadly actions. Our nation right now is suffering an epidemic of uncivil discourse. People cannot hold civil conversations with their neighbors, be it in person or through social media. As you are our elected leaders, I call all of our elected leaders to task for this epidemic. When you use H speech against one another, you model uncivil discourse for all Americans. As our leaders, you are teaching us that it is acceptable to behave this way, and it's simply not. Is it any wonder that my fellow citizens speak in uncivil terms and use H speech? We have elected leaders who condone it and model it. It is time for a different direction. The path towards civil discourse must start with all of you, our elected leaders. When you model civil discourse, you teach us appropriate ways to speak to one another. This does not require any legislation on your part. It requires you to think about the impact of your words, for as the Jewish tradition teaches, the most powerful weapon a human being possesses are words. They can wound or they can heal. There was way too much wounding emanating out of Washington, D.C. Whom among you will be brave enough to say to the American people, I pledge that I will not use the H word. I call upon my fellow legislators to do the same, to help restore civil discourse to America. Our eyes and ears turn to you. What will you do? I thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much. I wish it was that easy in Washington to bring civil discourse back. Some of us, well, all of us remember when it used to be that way, and it's kind of gotten off track substantially. So we'll talk a little bit about that in our further discussions, but I'd like now to hear from the overall Jewish Federation leader here in Greater Pittsburgh, Jeffrey Finkelstein.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you very much.
Finkelstein, but it's really fine.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson. Thank you, Congressman Doyle. I never like going after Rabbi Myers, and he said a lot of really important things, and I just would put an exclamation point on so many of his points. I also do want to thank the other people to my right who've been with our community ever since this took place and before as well. We have incredible political and law enforcement leadership, and we thank them deeply. So I want to take things in a slightly different direction from a Jewish community perspective. Our federation, there are about 145 Jewish federations across North America, and our federation about 2 years ago made the decision that we needed to hire a Jewish community security director. I don't know many other faith communities that have to make those moves these days. Today, there are over 40 since this horrible shooting took place in Pittsburgh. Our director has been to all of our Jewish institutions to make sure that they have the right security protocols in place, and we've hardened those facilities as much as we can. It costs millions and millions of dollars. Homeland Security has a grant program, and we have been a beneficiary of some of those dollars in the past. It is nowhere near enough to help us to make sure that our people stay safe. So I put that to all of you that are involved with Homeland Security. I want to just make it a little more personal too. I was not in the building at the time, but while the shooter was active inside the Tree of Life building, targeting the members of 3 of our community's congregations, I was on the street corner. I was over there very quickly after I heard the news that there was an active shooter. And I saw the police running down my street, as Rabbi Myers said, in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. That should not be happening. And the picture that will be forever seared in my memory was that afternoon. We'd gathered at our Jewish Community Center. On the 3rd floor, those of us from the Jewish community, Rabbi Myers was there. We were planning, what do we do to keep our community strong and resilient? But on the 2nd floor, those families were waiting to hear the news about their loved ones. And I just cannot, I'm getting teary now, I cannot get that picture out of my mind. So as you all look at what you can do, I hope you have that picture in your mind too. No family should have to go through that horror like I saw people here go through. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear from the expert in that area. Congresswoman Jackson Lee and I were with the Secretary about 3 weeks ago, and we heard this term, protective security advisor. And be honest with you, a lot of us had never heard of that individual before that hearing. So I hope you all have gotten a chance to meet your protective security advisor for this area, paid for by DHS. They're all over the country. And so, Bob, we'll let you have your time.
Mr. Chairman, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak with you and the other members of Congress. I'm humbled to be amongst this panel as well to share information with you. I've been privileged to be the Protective Security Advisor of the Pittsburgh District for the last 14 years. When we invented the position in 2005, I came back to my hometown after a career in the Air Force to be able to facilitate critical infrastructure protection. It really is meaningless. So what it was building relationships. It was meeting folks like Chief Schubert and Superintendent in order to work with them regarding what the federal government could bring, what the Department of Homeland Security could do to aid them in their activities to be as effective and efficient as possible. Before the hiring of the security director of the Jewish Federation, I spent a lot of time going from synagogue to synagogue, especially around grant time, looking at their various vulnerabilities. In fact, I visited the Tree of Life on 2 different occasions, the last time just a few months before with a local partner who actually led that trip, because the city of Pittsburgh recognized that having a person like a protective security advisor was so important that they hired a person in their public safety staff to have a similar kind of a role. I succeed through the partnerships that I have with local police, with the sites, with federations, with synagogues, with those who will listen to the advice that I provide. As well, I rely on our national government and our different programs to share with the community in order to be as successful as possible. We hope to find suspicious activity and the report of people who are dangerous through our See Something, Say Something campaigns. We know that we're motivated to put people to get assessments because we have grant programs. We also know that we have extremely effective response agencies as well as prevention agencies through our local fusion center because of the grant dollars that are being invested in the Urban Area Security Initiative Program and the State Homeland Security Grant Program. These programs provide us not only the programs to be local and active in the area with our local partners, but also it provides us in big DHS to have programs that we can point people to. As I go from county to county, because I cover 32 counties, and I give county-wide presentations to houses of worship regarding what they need to do to be more secure or safe, I can point back to our DHS websites, our templates, our plans, our various videos for training, and they find it to be very useful to potentially save lives in these scenarios. But 2, we're also talking about the kinds of people that can perpetrate these attacks, to be able to identify them, whether they be inside threats, folks that they know, or whether they be external threats, because we recently in the Pittsburgh area too had unfortunately a person motivated by external terrorists to carry out a bombing attack on a Christian church as well that was apprehended by the Department of Justice. So we have these things. We want people to be as alert as possible. And as I say, we don't want them wringing their hands in their pews, being afraid, but we want them to know that they're in control of their environments, to be prepared for not the worst risk. Well, if they are prepared for the worst risk, then they are prepared for every level of lesser emergency. And it may be even more plausible that the church catches fire and loss of life could occur. But if we're prepared for the worst case scenario, as we were in the synagogue, because they received the training, right? We gave the assessment. We did all that we could. But unfortunately, as Brad told me that morning, Bob, the worst has occurred when I talked to him. We do what we can. We send out the warning signs. We relay on the programs that we're involved, and we have those partnerships, because through those partnerships comes collaboration, and through that collaboration comes strength and community for us to all be able to work together.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate everyone's comments. We go back to Washington Monday and start, which will probably be a whirlwind effort to try to get our hands around this notion of domestic terrorism. And all my colleagues here have heard from their constituents individually and collectively as to what do you think we should do from a legislative standpoint. And we've heard the high capacity magazines. We've had the assault style weapons. And I'm just throwing it open to the group. Are there some other things you think members of Congress should be focusing on so to limit, if not eliminate, what you experience with the Tree of Life situation here in Pittsburgh?
There's something I'd like to say, and I don't know if I have the right term for it, but a lot of these attacks start out with some form of social media, putting things out. Us in law enforcement can't use, I'll say it as geofencing of specific terms, like kill, gun, something like that. We can't do it. The general public can do it. Private corporations can do it, but we can't do it. We need that power to be able to search and use that intelligence. Especially, we're preparing for a real-time crime center for 2020, and I mean that's something that would be invaluable for us, but we can't do it legally right now.
So is that a constitutional issue that the reason you can't do it, or
I don't know if
are the attorneys saying
First Amendment privacy.
it can't be done?
we can't do it.
Okay.
Private I think the ADL can do it.
There
Yeah.
are
Well,
efforts to
But
try to
we
do that.
can't, not as public.
Well, so much of the social media ball is we have so many people who become radicalized over the internet, the platforms that you can just put some of these things on are just proliferating exponentially. And so our challenge for us is how do we get our arms around it? But if you're saying law enforcement needs the ability to at least see what's going on in this arena, I guess there's some First Amendment free speech thing. Congresswoman Jackson Lee.
Chief, I think what you are confronting, thank you, Mr. Chairman, what you are confronting is that when, after 9/11, we gave overall law enforcement, particularly federal law enforcement, sweeping powers to deal with international terrorism, or terrorism as it was perceived, the word that I don't use, Islamic terrorist. And there was a big debate on the question of privacy, FISA motions that we've heard discussed now recently. And what you don't have and what we do not have is a framework to deal with domestic terrorism. And so your point today is helpful because we're beginning now to look at what laws are needed for both the federal law enforcement, FBI and others, and also law enforcement, recognizing that we are a unique country that protects civil liberties, civil rights, the Bill of Rights. So you're right, you don't have the tools, nor does the federal law enforcement, because we have no mechanism for dealing with domestic terrorism. And the only thing that we have, for example, that the DOJ can charge anyone is a hate crime, which is not, doesn't give the latitude of investigation that we need to have. For example, some of these horrific social media sites, 8chan, which has popped up all over for those who have been engaged or who are perpetrators. So much so, I think the chairman was very active in engaging with the owner of 8chan to pull down his site or pull down what he has unfortunately created. And it's difficult to get prosecution on hate crimes on that in social media if you also have First Amendment, freedom of expression, freedom of speech. So adding this to our basis of need, which you have just said, we have to provide you with a framework that will be in keeping with the Constitution, but will give you the tools locally to be involved. And if I might, Mr. Chairman, just want to add one thing, Mayor, i.e. the young man online at 3 a.m. in the morning. And what the FBI told us is that just recently they intercepted 23 wannabes or individuals that were promising horror and terror. And the question is, how do they then prosecute them? Mm-hmm. And it is because we do not have that framework. So, Mr. Chairman, it's something that we have to work together.
Yeah, and what we've done is work with YouTube, Facebook, Google, all those social media organizations. We have said to them, you have to do a better job at policing your own business, because so much of what's pushed out is pushed out on your platforms, and they tell us they're doing a better job, but I'm sure you can say stuff still gets through. But we have a robust effort to get the social media companies to do a better job than what they're doing, and we plan to pursue that even more. Your comments are good, but Congresswoman Jackson Lee's effort that we still have to come up with a strategy on how that's to work so federal, state, and local people can have access to that. Rabbi?
If it's illegal to yell fire in a movie theater, we need to create laws where it's illegal to say kill all Muslims on the internet, as an example, or hang all African Americans in this town, or blow up synagogues. We need to find where is the line that the First Amendment is now stepped over. If it's that you can't yell fire in the theater, well, isn't there some line that needs to be discussed and we find out where that's being crossed? So connected to that, we have all these really talented young people in the United States who are incredibly skilled at using computers. A lot of them for nefarious purposes, not necessarily illegal, but to find ways to get into corporations and wreak all sort of havoc. Well, if you have these other countries around the world that officially sanction and have departments where they use computers for cyber terrorism and other attacks upon the United States and other countries, why can't we create some private corporations with these really talented youth, give them $100,000 jobs, let them have these wonderful skills to put use for the benefit of society, have them be the ones who can monitor the dark web to see the things that are going on, to help give information, have them play with all of the loopholes and openings that the internet provides to better secure the institutions throughout our country. Let's put these tools to good use like these other foreign governments are doing.
Well, to the extent that I can say some of that's being done, I can't tell you
I
all
get it.
of it.
I get it.
But not enough, because one of our challenges is we've just recently gotten the intelligence agencies of the government to act as one. They all have historically siloed information so that the international arm of it didn't talk to the domestic arm. And so we had to pass legislation to say, no, you have to talk to each other. And so it's getting better. It's not complete. We don't have a person in the executive branch that's tasked with that single responsibility. Most of the people in the executive branch in this area are acting. And so because you have so many acting people, that does not give us the singular direction that we're hoping for, but hopefully we'll get that. I can say, Rabbi, we do hire hackers quite a bit just within the department, and they have proven to be very successful for us. But that's about as far as I can go in a public setting. But we do it.
I just want to go a little bit from what the chief is saying. There's an entire field being built right here in Pittsburgh on predictive analytics. We work with Carnegie Mellon University and give them a bunch of data, all of our building permits, the history of fire and everything else. They take that information and they can tell us the next buildings that will catch on fire. We can utilize data in order to be able to stop a fire before it happens. The same type of information, though, cannot be used by public law enforcement officials in being able to track where that next crime may occur. And that's what I think the chief is talking about. Just the ability to do the search is at one level, but adding on to it, the information that law enforcement could help us to find where that next act would happen and stop it before it does happen. The second part that sort of builds off that, there's a concern that exists amongst a lot of people, and I think the rabbi hit upon this, about where free speech in the First Amendment ends and where harassment begins. Where targeted harassment is a threat to an individual, taking away their ability to live in peace. And we need to have a clearer definition, because words matter. And as we learned in Pittsburgh, hate speech leads to hate crime. I worry every time an incident happens. And just last weekend, when it starts out and you hear that it's in Odessa, and then you hear there's somebody in Midland, we are doing nothing to address what unfortunately may become inevitable, which is when the copycat starts to be able to follow. And when there are people who are living in our society who are waiting for that day, when they see it happening in that one city, so they then get their gun and they go to the park, or they go to the synagogue, or they go to the church, and they want to follow and hope somebody will follow them. When we wake up and it's CNN breaking news, just like it was on September 11th when we heard it was the tower, and then the other tower, then it was Washington, D.C., and it's the same thing. And there's people out there who are networking this, and that information is out there, and we're doing nothing to break that network. We need those better tools. And then finally, the red flag laws are something that the vast majority of Americans want. They realize that there are people who are speaking out saying they're going to hurt themselves. And they know there's people that are speaking out and saying they're going to hurt other people. And family members in law enforcement should have the ability to go to a judge through due process and be able to say to that judge, this person is going to harm themselves or they're going to harm someone else. While they get the help they need, their guns should be taken away. Not doing so is irresponsible. Doing so is addressing the issue through the mental health side that a lot of politicians talk about. And if you're not willing to even do that, then don't use mental health as an issue, because there is a common sense approach to it to be able to address it. And the vast majority of Americans, including gun owners, would agree that that would be a good way to do it. And finally, there's a small group of mayors that have been meeting now, led by the mayors of Toledo and Cincinnati. We buy a lot of guns as cities. We buy a heck of a lot of bullets. We should not be buying bullets off of any manufacturer that makes body-piercing bullets to kill our officers. And we should be pulling those resources together in order to be able to reward the good companies. We shouldn't be buying our guns from manufacturers that are selling assault-style rifles to the general public. And we should be rewarding those that don't. We should think about it if we could take that to the federal level. With the amount of guns and bullets that the federal government buys, and reward the companies that are acting responsibly and not allowing the profits to go to those that are causing this epidemic on our streets.
If I may,
I just to follow up on some of what Bill brought up earlier, I'm just curious from the superintendent and the chief, how is information sharing between our federal partners and our local law enforcement, with regards to these threats that we hear about? Do you think that level of information sharing and partnership is working well? Does it need improvement? I'm just curious how you feel about our federal partners in law enforcement in terms of them sharing intelligence with you at the local level.
I think that's improved greatly over the years. I think we've been fortunate in Western Pennsylvania with the level of cooperation we do have between all the law enforcement agencies and on the federal level as well. I don't think that's a problem on that level. I can't speak for other areas around the country, but I can tell you here it's done extremely well. We do have a fusion center that is a state police, Pittsburgh police, county police. I mean, they all work together with that, so that's not a problem. But kind of going back to the thing when I was looking, when we have a threat like we had yesterday on social media,
Right.
2 words: kill Pittsburgh. If we can track those and pull them in, thankfully we got it, and our intel and the FBI did an incredible job all night tracking to where this person was and locating them. But as far as communication, I think we do a really good job. We have Region 13 within Western Pennsylvania, all the counties. So that portion, I think we do extremely well.
I'd have to agree with Chief Schubert. We both sit on the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force Executive Board. We meet monthly, bi-monthly. We share information. There's representatives of all the federal agencies, a number of the larger local agencies, as well as representatives of Chiefs Association. So everyone's in the same room sharing information. In addition to that, most of us, particularly the larger organizations, have officers or detectives on federal task forces. That's the natural. A threat comes up, those are the first people that are going to be involved. We have federal agents and local officers serving as task force officers, so there's that immediate, that's how I would usually become aware of something such as the threat that came up yesterday.
That's good to hear. And Mr. Chairman, I know you know this already, but the amount of money that we have in these grant programs is just completely insufficient for the need. And I'd like to see us divert some resources to that kind of a fund than to some construction projects we're hearing about. So I think that program really needs to be enhanced. Because I know the amount of money we've gotten here locally, and it's a pittance. It's not.
So you're eligible for URC funds here?
Yes, they are.
Okay, good.
If I might add one more thing, and we're talking about large federal programs, we're talking about federal agencies responding to this, monitoring intelligence. When the Tree of Life occurred, I'll go back. It was for uniformed first responders who contained that and really reduced the carnage. We have 75% of the population in this county are not policed by the county or the city police. We have police officers in this county who are making $9 an hour. Those are the people that we're counting on in the areas outside the city. We used to have grants that went directly to small local police departments so that we could pay people a living wage to train them to meet these kind of challenges. So I wanted to put that on the table.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, follow
Yes.
up. First, I wanted, Rabbi Myers, I'll be trying to be faithful to your terminology of the word hate. It is a challenge when we are in the midst of legislative debate on how we answer your set of examples, which are superb in terms of why can people say that. And I wanted to clarify that when the heinous terrorist acts came, it was focused on international terrorists or adversaries, and we were able to give the FBI far-reaching powers that did not take into consideration the First Amendment. We had to breach somewhat the Fourth Amendment dealing with unreasonable search and seizure, and we were allowed to do that because it was focused on non-citizens. And the issue that we have for those who engage in this who happen to be our citizens is what I said to the chief. We do not have a law scheme, if you will, that can respond to that. So we don't have a law that pierces the rights of citizens domestically right now. And again, let me say that we are reviewing this holistically so as not to suggest to anyone here that we finalize the approach or that we intend to violate rights. But we do realize that this is an atmosphere that is calling out for the tools to be able to address. And I think the connection should be that the words generate violence. And that's the distinctive, because we remember the old phrase of what words can do in sticks and stones. That's a real long time ago. But the words that generate violence, and Chief, I think that's where you're going, words that you have to wind up and your officers have to wind up in danger. And that's what we're grappling with now. We must get that framework set in place because we're in a whole new social atmosphere, and it involves hatred and evil and people that speak against and then act against people who are different. So I think I wanted to clarify that we don't want to not be focused, but that is why he has no tools at this moment. We must have the tools at this moment. The second thing I just wanted to say to the mayor, that is enormously effective. I came out of local government, so I'm always attuned to council and mayors and the power that you have. And so you were mentioning armor-piercing bullets, and you said some other aspect of the manufacturer. What was the other one?
There are both, well, and I should state that this committee that's being formed with the U.S. Conference of Mayors includes law enforcement officials.
Right.
And even when we participated, a commander was with me. So
Yes.
we want to make sure that our officers have the proper weapons that they need, but at the same time be able to find those There are wholesalers that will sell to us that will also sell to the general public.
I see.
And then there are others that do not put those weapons for sale to the general public and only work with local government.
Well, let me follow up. I had a gun summit yesterday, and I know we're talking about issues under the umbrella of terrorism, domestic terrorism, but law enforcement said to me that the AR-15s, for example, that the body armor does not necessarily protect against an AR-15 bullet and usage, that tears through. It may be different levels of armor, but they were concerned with that kind of equipment on the street, and they indicated that equipment is on the street, not in the hands of officers, but in the hands of, in quotes, bad people. So, we have to, in our course of domestic terrorism, have to acknowledge that, and I hope all my colleagues are, how should I say, infused with the openness of which all of you have said certain aspects or certain types of guns and ammunition should not be on the street. And why can't we handle that? So my last point is, I hope that you all, as this committee, addresses the National Rifle Association, which is not going away, which millions of Americans are members of, which we in Congress have no desire to take away their membership. But as we understand, the membership is as supportive on some of these as any other person. They are supportive of the idea of universal background checks, closing the Charleston loophole. There's 60% of the American people for banning weapons of war. So I hope that in your committee that maybe you will be able to speak to the NRA in terms of its intense lobbying in Congress to block every reasonable approach to dealing with what you have just said at this table. Every reasonable approach.
13 members of the committee will be in Washington on Monday, standing in front of the White House to have your back.
Thank you, Mayor.
Chief, weren't the officers had vests that come on inside the building? Were they pierced by the fire? Wasn't one officer's vest pierced?
I can't speak to that, because it's still pending a trial. I can't speak to that. But what I can tell you is, when I arrived on scene, I'm watching one officer with an old revolver and one officer with a handgun, and I can tell you it was very reassuring seeing our officers come with the weapons they needed to deal with it. I came in regular clothes as soon as I heard what was going on. I didn't have a vest with me, but I can tell you a vest wouldn't have mattered for me. We are looking at vests with the plates that can help protect our officers. They're heavier, they're costly, but we are looking at that for our officers now.
So, taking off from the earlier comment, if Congress looked at a program to assist local law enforcement with the purchase of those kinds of items, that would be something you think would be worthwhile?
Absolutely. I mean, we have to do everything we can to protect our officers. We also got to do it right. I mean, we've seen times where money's just thrown and not necessarily the right equipment or the right stuff is purchased. If we do it right, yes, so we can protect our officers.
Chairman.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah. You know what is striking to me is what I'm hearing is the balancing act between freedom of speech and the need to respond to speech, and it's always been a critical issue since the inception of this experiment we call the United States. The other interesting thing that Superintendent McDonough mentioned, there are outlying communities where the officers are expected to protect and serve at $9 an hour with vests that could potentially be pierced by different ammunitions. That's a lot to ask anyone, and I think that's something that I'll keep in the back of my mind as I formulate this thing. I mean, we're talking about, people, and which is fine, working at McDonald's making $15 an hour, but to ask someone to leave their family every day to protect and serve a community at $9 an hour is not good.
Yeah, Don, this county's somewhat unique. There are 130 political subdivisions in Allegheny County. My district alone, I represent not only the entire city of Pittsburgh, but another 55 communities around the city of Pittsburgh. So I have 56 mayors in my district. I've got 1,000-some council people. All of them have these police departments. And I started out in borough council in the community I grew up in. At that time, we had federal revenue sharing, and we had 22 full-time police officers in the borough of Swissvale. Now what you see in a lot of my communities around the Mon Valley are part-time police officers that are working maybe in 2 or 3 different towns. They're maybe getting 10 hours in one town and then getting another 20 hours in another town. And these communities don't have the money to pay for them. And like Coleman has said, I mean, this is a problem. You're seeing some communities giving up their police forces in these smaller towns because they can't afford them, and there's liability concerns. And we've had some tragedies in some of these outside towns, and it's a real problem, and it's one that's probably somewhat unique to Allegheny County because take Philadelphia, that's one county, one municipality, one police force, one mayor. Here, 100 mayors, 100 different police forces, and many of them, like the superintendent said, are part-timers that are making $10 an hour, and they're working in some of the toughest communities in the county, and I don't even know how they get people to do that, but it's a real problem here.
I know in South Jersey, the city of Camden, who was in financial straits for quite some time, right across the river from Philadelphia, went to joining forces with the county police and have given up their police department, and a lot of their officers have moved over to the county, and they do the service. It seems like with that many different entities, they might want to look at potentially, but everyone
It's
gets
been
back
tried.
to silos, I guess.
In Western Pennsylvania, when you tell these small communities that they have to merge together and become one, it's like taking their kids from them. They want to know who's going to be the chief, what color the police car is going to be. This is a beloved part of America, but we have some very stubborn habits here
Understood.
that are hard to break.
Rabbi, you were about to make some comments?
Just a small piece of history to give a frame of reference. November 10th, 9th and 10th, 1938, Nazi Germany, Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, when state-sponsored domestic terrorism was permitted, where the police in cities throughout Germany held the line so that vandals, citizens, could attack the Jews, burn down their synagogues, break up their shops, murder citizens for the crime of being Jewish, and the police held them back. The police did nothing. Fast forward 80 years later, the police of Pittsburgh were the first ones in to save the Jews. They didn't run away, they came in. So just as part of the record, forever grateful to the heroic Pittsburgh police and the other group. Gun control's an issue that has divided, continues to divide our country. It seems still sometimes common sense gets thrown out the window because of competing interests that have nothing to do with gun control. I saw a post that was very profound, and it said, in short, You're afraid that we're going to take away your guns. We're afraid you're going to take away our children. We didn't take away your guns. You took away your children. Who should be afraid now? While it's probably something crazy to suggest, I'm going to throw it out anyway. Why can't we have a buyback? Get rid of all those guns off the street. Because as the chief has pointed out, those vests are at least $1,000 a vest. So we get better vests. The other side gets better weapons. We keep providing more and more and more as we spiral higher and higher and spend more money.
Mr. Chairman.
Nobody knows of a reasonable reason that I can hear why any citizen should be able to own a semi-automatic weapon. If you need that to hunt deer, you need a new avocation, quite frankly. So it's unattractive and scary, but sometimes it takes just brave people to step forward and say, there is no legitimate reason to have that gun on the street in anyone's hands, period.
Yeah, one of the challenges that go with that is, and I think that Mayor brought it up, you have to have, if you got a buyback program, you need to have something in place that they don't make them or sell them, because somebody else, you gotta either make them illegal, so you got to give them up within a certain period of time, or you're breaking the law. And those are a lot of the public policy questions that we'll be grappling with when we go back next week, because there are a couple of bills that have been filed talking about a buyback program.
Yeah, and that was going to be my point, Rabbi. I have a piece of legislation for a gun buyback program that I first initiated after Newtown and what happened in Connecticut. I thought at that time, as to reiterate what Congressman Doyle was saying, that after we saw those babies massacred, then I thought that this country would step up, to my chagrin. And so I implemented a gun buyback piece of legislation that never really saw the light of day because of the politics in Congress and the NRA. And so I have reintroduced that legislation 3 times now over the past 7 years. And so hopefully now we are in a position where it'll at least be entertained and looked at seriously. So.
Mayor, that's a novel approach, but it's a common sense approach that you talked about. If every police department in America decided that they were going to only buy ammunition from companies who did not produce armor-piercing bullets, they'd get it real quick.
It's true.
I mean, it would, that economic impact of a decision like that would put a lot of our men and women out of harm's way from those type bullets. But that's the step. And, we have to make as many of those steps as we can to make our communities safe. So I can assure you that that comment and suggestion very warmly received, and we'll be happy to include that in our listings. But we have to, we have to follow a lot of this up. Otherwise, if you leave the back door open, you still got communities that still will be harmed because people will still have access to certain things. So the buyback is another example of getting some of those weapons off the street. Yeah. And it won't guarantee all of them, but it's a start. And the question would be for us is, are there other things that you think members of Congress should consider legislatively to help in this arena?
Just follow up on the first part of it. I think when you're debating this issue, it's not just the domestic terrorism that is coming about through mass homicides, but it's the mass amount of homicides. It's the daily homicides. It's the kids that are being killed, an innocent life that's being stolen. And when you do have this discussion, I can tell you that I've spoken to emergency room doctors from 3 trauma hospitals and our children's hospital as well. It's very important to have their testimony, because there will be those that will say that a handgun will cause greater damage than an AR-15. But when you bring the doctors into the debate about the way that the bullet tumbles as it enters the human flesh, of what it does to the soft tissue, of what happens with the vacuum because of the volume, the speed of the bullet that creates a vacuum out of the back of the wound, bigger than into the wound. All of those things are absolutely critical in understanding why it's unsafe, or even more unsafe to walk on our streets because of these types of weapons, and why they are different than other types of weapons. Having those medical experts can really bring that testimony home in a way that counters arguments strictly from ballistic experts.
See, the other public policy issue that we face is, in America, we pride ourselves on our way of life. You know, you can come and go pretty much as you please. The notion that things are different now, but you really don't want, if you can help it, so that if I pass by the synagogue and there are 3 or 4 armed people out there, you say, oh, I might not want to go there because it looks dangerous. So what we're trying to do is come up with reasonable things that still allow people to go about their day-to-day livelihoods without fear of that I'm, in some kind of a violent zone or something. And that's a public policy issue, and we've changed a lot, but we still have some freedoms as Americans that, to the extent that we can protect those freedoms, I think we should. Technology helps us a good bit on protecting some of those freedoms, but overall, I think it's good people like you who help us frame the public policy that we can roll out, and we allow you to help us implement it because you're on the front lines. And so that's our challenge. We have a program that we've put a little money in to help with houses of worship. Not nearly enough money. And we'll work hard at trying to get that amount increased. But it's a challenge. People on one hand tell you, we can't spend it, but then they move money from the military budget to build a wall, $3.6 billion. You say, well, if we had $3.6 billion, we could put a new vest on every law officer in America. We could do a lot of those things. So you have to help us make the argument what's the highest and best use of the dollars that we have available to us, and help us convince other colleagues of ours that this is the way to go, and that's a difficult challenge.
Just to say a couple of things, and I want to come back to the securing of religious facilities in a moment. But going back to some of the online hate speech, I understand the issues with constitutional rights, and I love this country. However, I think private citizens can look at these kinds of things and report them. And I know with Homeland Security, and we've embraced the See Something, Say Something campaign, maybe there's just a way to engage the public in a deeper way who are looking at some of those websites and may see some, not just hate speech, and I am going to use the word, but threatening speech. Because if it's reported, then I believe law enforcement can act. And it's something that we've done in our Jewish community here in Pittsburgh through our security director with the virtual command center, trying to filter everything through there and then to share it with local and federal law enforcement. So I just want to put that out there as an idea. So I want to talk about the dollars to secure our facilities in Greater Pittsburgh. Our catchment area is Allegheny County, Westmoreland County, Butler County, and little spots in other areas. Number of Jewish institutions, good number of Jewish institutions. We've estimated that to harden those facilities, just hardening, we're not talking about any security personnel, is nearly $6 million. And these are institutions, as all religious institutions, that are striving to achieve mission. And again, I would state again that I don't think there's any other community of faith, no other religious community that has been as targeted with hate incidents as the Jewish community when it comes to religion. So, and I don't remember all the statistics, but the ADL does have those kinds of data points. So just to make it real, we've got a huge gap here, and that's what Congressman Doyle was talking about before. So while you're working on everything else, which I think is going to take you some time, we need to keep our citizens safe.
All right. Follow up on that. First of all, I would join in your comments, and particularly as it relates not only to the Jewish community, but I think when we had the advisory committee, it was ecumenical, and for some reason, religious institutions themselves, but certainly we know the history of the Jewish community. We were in the backdrop of the churches in Louisiana that had just been burned by someone full of hate. So when we were dealing with Islamic terrorism, that words that I refrained from speaking, there was an effort by the Obama administration that was effective countering terrorism. And it was engaging with communities to talk about, from the youth up, about any thoughts that might generate activity that was akin to what occurred in 9/11. Some misinterpretation of it, some disrespect of it. I thought it was very effective because at the time the Secretary of Homeland Security was actually going around the country having these events. So my suggestion, Mr. Chairman, is I think we saw the defunding of that is to have back into DHS, to answer Rabbi Myers, your point of something dealing with downing domestic terrorism, which is confronting and going in and doing outreach and embracing ideas that you've offered, but have an actual office that deals with recognizing domestic terrorism exists and recognizing that we must find a myriad of ways to deal with it. And this would be the kind of reaching groups, individuals, et cetera, to address the question. And then secondarily, the investigative aspect in DHS was also practically defunded, I think down to zero. And having you all embrace the importance of putting that back in the Department of Homeland Security, that investigations can go on, research can go on, the chief can call, or the Protective Security Office can connect to that particular office under DHS, because it's Homeland Security, would be very helpful. I want to conclude on this point. I'm not stuck on it, but I believe that it is emerging, and it's just something that we have to confront, and it may be because of who I am, but it is evidence of disaffected young white males, and there is evidence on ADL, Southern Poverty Law Center, about white supremacy, white nationalism, and also the idea that racism or the hatred of religious groups is a national security threat. And again, what I tie that to are words that generate violence. Words that generate violence. And so you have perpetrator, Tree of Life, had some attitudes and thought he had to be the one to wipe things out. You had the Coast Guard person who had to solve problems through bombs, and you had the other individual who had to solve problems in Florida through bombs as well. And then you had, in my home state, the gentleman who drove miles and miles to El Paso with a manifesto. He had to cure something. So I just think help with supporting, restoring an effective focus on that in DHS would give the chairman and all of us some extra push that this needs to be restored. Not a Gestapo, not something that denies the rights of Americans, but answers your questions, answers the rabbi's question, because one piece of it is outreach, is saying, how do we cure this? How do we get people together? Because that's what they did under counterterrorism. They had people going into mosques and churches and bringing people together on the international aspect of it. Of course, people came in and defunded that, but it might be a helpful approach that the chairman could lead on.
Yeah, we had a department called Counterviolent Extremism, CVE. It was very robust. That responsibility was to go into a community like Pittsburgh, engage the Muslim community, engage whatever community that might have felt marginalized, and work with them. The problem they had is they could not engage anybody in the right-wing community at all. They just could not come up with a group. The one group that got funded in Chicago to try to work with some of that, they defunded with the election of a new president, so they never got the money. So we're trying to work toward that. A couple other items let me share with you. One of the situations in California, the person was able to leave California and go to Nevada and purchase a gun that was illegal in California, but he could buy it in Nevada and brought it back. So we're going to have some coordination of purchasing across state lines. And we're going to look at that in terms of guns, too. I don't know if you all had that problem in this community, Mayor.
Yeah.
But
we have it with, in particular, lost and stolen handguns.
yes.
We trace the weapon back. It reports back to a straw purchaser. The person who had it, it was a convicted felon or ex-felon, and the person says it was stolen. It's the get out of jail free card.
Absolutely. The other item that we're looking at is, I can buy a gun from my good Congressman Doyle here, and I don't have to do any checks, no background check. We're looking at, there ought to be something to say that you just can't sell me this gun because I'm your friend. You need to go somewhere and you, the penalties on the seller of the gun to make sure that the person you selling it to is authorized to own a gun. Right now, there's nothing in the law that says that sale should not go forward. So we're looking at that as another one of those efforts to close that rear door of purchasing guns. Some people are upset over that, but the law-abiding gun owner has no problem with it. And I think that's the thing we try to keep in mind as we go forward on that. The other aspect of this is how do we coordinate mental health needs in communities? And I don't want to blame a lot of what's going on mental health, but there are some things that we could help communities like Pittsburgh, Allegheny County with if at the federal level we started pushing more resources into communities, because actually those resources have been cut so that we have a lot of homelessness, people who are released from mental institutions don't have anywhere to go. There's just a lot of that in communities, and part of what we have to show is all of this adds to our community, and if we can fix that aspect of it, then to some degree we can't blame that person who created that act is just crazy. Well, we need a stronger system, and I'm saying that we've talked to psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, and they all have said to us that we need a better system of working with people who have issues. And the other, in my state, Mississippi, I can go to a mental institution and get out and, might have some issues, but if it's not mandatory for the acquisition of a gun, so I could still acquire a gun, because the reporting for my state does not report that institutionalization to the federal government. So some of it is coordinating a lot of what's happening so that the authorities that have the approval for acquisition of guns will actually know that this person has a problem. So, but those are public policy issues that we have to coordinate, and that's the challenge that we have, because some units of government like things just as they are. They're not as proactive as you are, and we have to convince those other colleagues of ours that this is a better way of doing it. So we'll look forward to working in that arena. Now, are there some more resources you think the federal government could be helpful in a community like Pittsburgh that could help you keep your community safe?
Well, the Health and Human Services and the county jail are part of the county, and I would ask the county exec, but I'll give you one example you can take back to DC. We have had people who've been talking about the increased number of homeless that are on the streets of Pittsburgh, and there are more homeless on the streets of Pittsburgh. They've been complaining about the panhandlers, and there are more panhandlers. And they've been complaining about people with mental health issues, and there are more people with mental health issues. And when I go to the U.S. Conference of Mayors and National League of Cities, I hear from mayor after mayor after mayor, there's more homeless, there's more panhandlers, there's more people with mental health issues on our streets. We don't have a domestic policy. We don't have a domestic policy to deal with that. And so how does the public want it dealt with? More police. Put more police on the street. So we put more police on the street. A woman who was sleeping at a bus stop who was homeless, police officer went 2 weeks ago to check on her to make sure she was okay. And as he was talking to her, a person with mental health issues reached over the officer's shoulder, stabbed her in the neck, and killed her. How many more police can you put?
He was right there.
Yeah. You can't solve it by criminalizing mental health or homelessness or addiction. You can only solve it by dealing with those issues. Now you make it even easier to get a weapon. And people wonder why in cities you're seeing increased homicides. The reason that they're in cities is because that's where the services are. That's where the bed is. That's where the bathroom is. That's where the doctor is. That's where you can get a meal. They're not going out into the suburbs. It's the only place they have. And the only solution that we hear is put more police on or put them in jail. Yeah, it would be really nice if we had from Washington a domestic policy that helped to address that, because we're lucky we have winter. Otherwise, we'd be like the other cities in the South and the West that have just been overrun with the problem we created.
Yes.
And to follow up on that, many of the folks who are in the county jail are there because they have mental health issues. And we have turned in many ways the jail into a secondary mental health institution, because we have closed a lot of institutions that used to house individuals who had mental health issues. When they go on the street, oftentimes, and they act in ways that, you know, aren't what many people would consider normal ways to act. Many police officers, the only tool they have is to take them to the county jail and arrest them and take them to the county jail. So I think the mayor's is right on, in that there does need to be a policy along those lines, that we don't turn our jails, our county jails, into secondary mental institutions.
Well, you know, our goal for these sessions is to hear from people who kind of on the front line in some respects, but also who've been impacted. The last thing I can tell you is that we have the answer, but we've heard you. Now, some of this is going to require investment, and those investments, the term we have, you can't get blood from a turnip. I've been a mayor. I've been a county commissioner. I know Washington has to set the standard for what you want this country to be and look like, but it requires investment, and we have to determine what our priorities are as a country. And some of us would love to see the resources that are being, we are paying private contractors $770 a day to house children per person. That's an awful lot of money. Now, Chief, I don't know what it costs you all here per day for prisoner, but it's not $770 per day. And so that's the kind of costs that we are spending separating children from families, and we could be putting that money to better use working with good people like you on protecting your cities and your counties and your houses of worship. And so that's part of the public policy debate that we'll have over the next 3-4 weeks on trying to get this accomplished. The Homeland Security budget is one of the budgets that's not approved so far. Right. So there's some hope that religious institutions, for instance, might have an increased funding opportunity. The whole notion of counter-violent extremism, we can put monies in that budget so you can have people in law enforcement going into the community, talking to people before something happens. Those preemptive situations historically have worked out better. So we will try to do all of that. I'm going to kind of defer the closing comment to our host.
Well, Mr.
Chairman.
Chairman, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you and commend your committee for getting out from the confines of Washington, D.C. And out into the communities where people have suffered these tragedies. I know this is the first stop in multiple stops your committee's going to make across the country where these incidents have happened. I think the best way to ultimately come to some solutions that may work is to get out here and hear what people who have been on the front lines experience. So I commend you for that. There's not easy answers to any of this. These are complex issues. I wish there were simple solutions for them. They're not. I think each region in the country too has some unique problems they deal with. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of situation. But I know that the most effective way to bring this back to the members that don't sit on your committee is to do exactly what you're doing right now, and I think it will be valuable to see the report that your committee files once you've had the opportunity to go across this country and get input like you did today from members here from the city of Pittsburgh. So I commend you for that, and I hope to have you all back in our great city under better circumstances so that I can show you a proper visit that the next time you come that may include some more pleasant festivities. But thank you for this, and I want to thank our elected officials and our law enforcement and members of our community for saying yes when we called on the phone and asked you to give us this input. It's important to the committee, and I can tell you that one of Pittsburgh's best kept secrets is we all work together. This is a community that really, it's a small, big town. People really care about each other here. It's a great place to live, and I can tell you that my job as a member of Congress is a lot easier because I have partners that work together instead of against one another, and that's made my job a lot easier too. So I want to thank all of you. These are all people I consider good friends. And good public servants and good members of our community that all want the same thing. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I wish you continued success as you tour the country to get input from different parts of the country, and I look forward to seeing the report that comes from it once you're done. Thank you once again.
If there, I don't know if there's anyone in the audience who might have a question. If so, we don't want to close it out without having an opportunity perhaps for someone to have a question.
Mr. Chairman, if I can introduce City Council President Bruce Kraus has been here for the entire meeting. I just want to make sure that his presence is recognized.
President, always good to meet a president. Any other council person here, Mr. Mayor? Nope. Well, again, we'll be around a little while, but I appreciate the hospitality you've shown us. I appreciate you sharing your ideas as to how we can address this whole issue of domestic terrorism in this country. But I also say, to the extent that we can do it and not have people feeling like things are so bad and so scary, because then they don't want to go to a movie, they want to go to dinner, and when people don't spend money in the communities, you can't really have a thriving community. So part of what we're trying to do is keep us safe, but we've seen things grow. I'm done after this, but at one point we used to worry about having cameras everywhere. People say, oh my goodness. And now, the minute something happens, everybody is looking for a camera because you know somewhere there's a picture. So we've kind of shifted our thinking in that area, but it's been positive because people see those cameras as a force multiplier for security. And so it's technology coupled with bright ideas that can keep us safe. And we believe in pushing technology from the committee's standpoint. And even the older guys around understand technology now. They might not know how to use it, but they know it's important. And they'll find somebody young to operate it and move forward. But again, thank you all very much. Thank the staff of the committee.
Do you mind if I just a couple more minutes?
Sure, sure.
And I'm sure you're going to hear this at other places, but I just want to make sure that if you don't, that you hear it from us. One, thank you for doing this, but two, and I don't know how you address it, but it's equity across this country. There's not an infinite amount of money that everybody gets, but there's departments that can afford the equipment. There's departments that can afford to provide training to their officers, whether it's rescue task force, whether it's active shooter training, whether it's going out into the community to help teach this to faith-based communities or businesses and things like that. I mean, we've been very fortunate. We can do that. Not every department can. As Superintendent McDonough talked about, there's a lot of departments that have part-time officers or may only have 8 to 10 police officers. They can't afford to do that training. They can't afford to take people off the street to put them through that training. They may not be able to afford to take them off the street to put them in the community to work with these faith-based communities or businesses or you name it. So I don't know how you do that, but you've got to look at that throughout the country, how that money's going to be deployed to help them, to better help the community.
It's good.
Well, and part of the way we try to do it generally is require, when we push it out, that everyone has to be trained. After 9/11, you know, the sheriff's department couldn't talk to the police department because you're on different frequencies. And so part of that interoperability challenge came with us saying, we'll give you some money to upgrade your systems, but you all have to be able to talk to each other. Because the public assumes that when something happens, you all are talking to each other anyway. But that hadn't always been the case. Some communities are better, but we're going to do we provide a lot of training, but it's not nearly enough. So we might have to get with the chiefs associations and some other things that come up with some baseline skills, or help fund the training academy, so that we can get all our law enforcement personnel up to a minimum standard of care for this new phenomenon that they're confronted with under the domestic terrorist umbrella. I know everybody has minimum standards, but it's a new day, and we're gonna have to work diligently with that. So thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor, for being a gracious host.
Thank you.
Thank you.